I started to notice this culture of people wanting to say the right things or the, approved opinions in order to get a pat on the back. And I didn't see any courage displayed. Like, on the contrary, I saw cowardice, right? They would consistently twist things in order to make a cheap point. That wasn't funny. And I'm like, I don't like that. I'm not for cowardice. I'm for courage. What's up, everybody? Let me do a walk away video. So this is a video about why I decided to walk away from the Democratic Party and how that came about and where I'm at now. I'm a tech entrepreneur. I was always in the tech world. Born and raised in Denmark, moved to New York City in 1999, got a job for a tech firm up in Boston called Arstidida. And it was like, all my friends, everybody in that world, in that industry, were Democrat supporters. Clinton was great. Obama was great. Giuliani in New York was a monster. That type of the George Bush was, a lunatic. Ronald Reagan was a fraud or something or other. I'm not sure. I came to America always having been fascinated with America and, having a deep love for America. I still do. I remember at one point, I had a friend who turned out to be a Republican. He was a colleague. He was also a tech guy. And it was just such a shock to me that he could support George Bush as president. It was like something was wrong with him or something. I just didn't understand how he could do that. He seemed like a nice guy. I didn't quite get it. And this was back in around 2000 when George Bush was elected. I remember I was living in New York at the time, and I remember that election and thinking that was weird, something was wrong. And I was really, really sad that Al Gore didn't win that election. I was convinced that it must have been fraud, that the election was stolen. I watched the Michael Moore movie where he claims that it's George Bush's brother or cousin or something that calls it out for Fox. And I bought into all of that stuff, hook, line, and sinker. I moved back to Copenhagen. I had an American that worked for me for a year, and he turned me on to Jon Stewart. And so I'd watch The Daily Show, every single episode of The Daily Show, up until the point where Trevor Noah took over. I never became a fan of Trevor Noah's. Stephen Colbert, John Oliver, all of those people, right? Michael Moore. I was like full on board, full hook, line, and sinker on board with them. CNN, I was like, yeah, CNN's great. I felt like in the center of the universe watching CNN. And what's interesting too is that in Denmark, I was always leaning right because the social democrats and that whole victim mentality and people are helpless. And I saw all the failings of the welfare state. But America, in my mind, was different. America was way more capitalist. It was like rabidly capitalist, like crazy capitalist. So it made sense for me that if you're on right wing in politics in Denmark, then you're left wing in America because the lines that are the center points don't line up. That was what I told myself. Then later on, I started a company in the US and I realized, holy shit, after having started one in Denmark years ago, and I realized it's like Denmark is more capitalist than America. America is way more bureaucratic, way more regulated, way more like heavy ass welfare. The tax burden is lower on paper, but then you also pay tolls on the roads and you pay for healthcare and you pay for education and all that. So America is just a more socialist, less efficient version of Denmark in many ways. Sidebar, in 2013 on my birthday, my wife and I had moved to India. I lived there for a year. And on my birthday, she had asked me a bunch of big life questions. And one of them I answered something like, I want to be a special advisor to the President of the United States on conscious nation building. And it was such a weird moment for me because it was a phrase that I'd never uttered before. I'd never thought it before. It came out of my mouth in response to something like, if you could do anything in what you wanted, what would it be? And of course, I had tears in my eyes. I was in awe. I was, just in tears for 20, 30 minutes after that. I was just totally floored by this idea, by the magnitude of it. And of course, I pictured Obama. Because Obama was the president at the time. I actually had a t-shirt that said, January 20th, 2009, right, which was the Obama's inauguration date. I wore that T-shirt because I was like, yeah, let's get rid of George Bush. He's terrible and he starts wars all over and all of that stuff. I was fully bought into all that. Actually, in 2000, when he first won, that was sad, but obviously he stole it. And then when Americans actually elected him with a pretty solid majority in 2004, that just devastated me. I lost faith in America. I'm like, guys, you've lost your way. You're such good people. And how could this happen? And all of that. I was so bought into Michael Moore, actually, that after Trump won and Michael Moore did a Broadway show, I went to that. I went to see that. Right? Trump, I think, made all of us pay more attention to politics. I saw Larry. I gotta look up his name now because I keep bungling it. Larry Lessig. Larry Lessig is someone that I've been following since my days in the tech world. He's a lawyer. He was into IP law, and then he moved into politics and specifically into corruption because he correctly identified that the biggest problem that we have is corruption in politics. Politicians spending the majority of their time fundraising and thus being in the pocket of all kinds of interests, and that prevents anything else meaningful from getting done. And so he actually ran in the 2016 election. And one of the things that he revealed was that the DNC maneuvered hardcore to get him to not participate in the first primary debate or in any of the primary debates. And so that was a little bit of a red flag for me. But still, Trump got elected. I thought he was interesting. Because I knew that corruption was a big deal. And I disliked Hillary Clinton. I don't trust her for a second. I didn't then. She seems super phony to me, still do. But I still loved Bill Clinton, right? Whenever he would come on, I'd be like, oh yes, the voice of sanity. And he's so smart and attractive and whatnot. Or appealing, let's say, appealing. But yeah, Trump made all of us pay more attention, I think. And it was appealing to me that he was an outsider because corrupt politicians, right? It was appealing to me that he had his own money because corrupt politicians. It was appealing to me because he was not politically correct. Because I've never bought into the politically correct notion. It feels like thought police to me. It feels like it's wrong to have this political correctness that we can't say, call a shovel for a shovel. I don't know if that's an expression in English. It's an expression in Danish. And so he wins. I'm like trying to make sense of this situation, right? I remember my vocal teacher, she was like, but you don't understand, he's Hitler. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure he's not Hitler, right? Like, no, that ain't it. So I wasn't scared. I wasn't, I wasn't that shocked. I went upstate for election day because I don't get to vote because I'm on a visa and don't have that privilege. So my wife and we went upstate during the election, and I saw all these signs for Trump. And that's when I realized he might actually have a chance. But I didn't fully materialize until then. He freaking won, and it was like, I was shell-shocked, and I think everybody else was shell-shocked, right? So trying to make sense of this thing, I remember started watching Rachel Maddow, Trevor Noah, Seth Meyers, Stephen Colbert, all these. And I remember Rachel Maddow being like, oh, like Russia, Putin, he has all these bankruptcies. He can only get loans from Russian oligarchs, and he's in the pocket of those, and we'll prove it soon. And like nothing happened. I even signed up for the Washington Post paid subscription because like democracy dies in darkness and we can't have this, and like really, believing in it and, getting more interested. Then things started to turn around, and I think there was the comedians, the quote unquote comedians like Stephen Colbert, John Oliver. I was a huge John Oliver fan. I signed up for HBO just so I could watch John Oliver shows. I dreamt of becoming like a John Oliver. Seth Meyers, I started watching a lot of his, especially he had this one segment that was, I forget what it's called. But the thing that got to me was they were just mean. Especially they were super mean to Eric Trump. And I was like, Seth Meyers was the worst on this, but Stephen Colbert was pretty bad too. And I'm like, dude, that's not funny. That's just mean. That's just you being a nasty human being. And so that started to really irked me. It really did. I'm like, that's not fair game at all. And it's not funny. It's just not fun. Like, you have to be a nasty human being to think that's funny. Like, you have to be such a mean-spirited person to think that's funny. And so that turned me on to the fact that maybe these are actually nasty, mean people. Trevor Noah talking about shithole countries, like the Trump comment supposedly about these countries, certain countries being shithole countries, and then his segment about how racist that was. Dude, if you think that that's about racism, I think I know who's the racist here, and it ain't Trump, right? Like, it's actually Trevor Noah being the racist for thinking that this has anything to do with racism when there's no evidence of that. And there's very good reasons to think that it's not. There's no reason whatsoever to think that it's about racism, right? It was mentioned Norway. He had just been with the Prime Minister of Norway, and Norway is a very organized country with great education and great institutions. And so obviously the people that are coming from there are going to have some great qualifications and skills and values and culture to bring with them. So it's not about racism, it's about values. I started to notice this culture of people wanting to say the right things or the, approved opinions in order to get a pat on the back. And I didn't see any courage displayed. Like, on the contrary, I saw cowardice, right? They would consistently twist things in order to make a cheap point. That wasn't funny. And I'm like, I don't like that. I'm not for cowardice. I'm for courage. I'm for truth and honesty and being real. Integrity is really important to me. And there is zero integrity here. And I was like, they have to know that they're doing this. They must know that they're doing this, and they were so desperate for this, right? Another thing that happened was the whole Brexit vote, which everybody were on board with, like, so powerfully. I'm like, why the fuck do you care? And what do you even know about this? Like, I was born and raised in Denmark, and I've grown up with this creeping European community becoming the European Union and, like, more and more union. And I know how removed the parliament and the council and all this other stuff is from the day-to-day life of Danes living in Denmark. We have no relationship with the EU. We have very little relationship with the culture in the other countries. I mean, we're all European, obviously, but we don't know what's going on in the zeitgeist of the other countries. Why do you guys care so intently here in America? What is this about? It's weird to me. I decided at one point in late 2017 to deliberately seek out voices that I would disagree with, right? And there was this culture of forbidden voices that you weren't even allowed to consider, right? Alex Jones was one that would always be brought up, and he would be ridiculed, or a Fox News was obviously, like, pure propaganda drivel. I'd never watched it. Oh, I didn't dare to watch it. It was clearly, horrible stuff, and they were clearly, terrible racists, everybody over there. And their slogan, I mean, give me a break, like, fair and balanced. Like, I mean, they're nowhere near fair and balanced. No, CNN is fair and balanced, right? Jon Stewart is, well, fair and balanced. But and I kind of believe that, right? But maybe MSNBC is fair and balanced, but Fox is, like, pure partisan propaganda, right? That's what I thought. That's what I believed. And so I started to look out, like, it started, some of these voices that I was were afraid of, like these people were presented as being pure Nazis and coke addicts and just, like, horrible, terrible people. And even thinking about listening to them made you a Nazi by association. That was how I had understood it to be, right? And remember, I came in from the outside just trying to make my way around this. I wasn't particularly active in politics, although, only for the comedy shows. I remember seeing this thing that said that people who watched The Daily Show were better informed than people who watched, like, other shows. And so I was like, yeah, I'm very well informed. I know everything that's going on. It's, like, everything that matters, right? So I started having conversations with people that challenged some of my beliefs, which was phenomenal. It was a little shocking at first, right? Because I lived in this bubble where we all agree and, like, yeah, these people are terrible. Yeah, bad people. Oh, Republicans, you can't trust them. They're just, like, they're racist, and they're just in it for themselves, and they're all bought and sold, and they don't care about, ordinary people. No, we want people like Clinton and Bill, obviously not Hillary, and so on. And so that was the bubble that I was living in. And so when I met people that would, gently pop some of those beliefs, I'm like, I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true. And that's not how I see it, etc. That was kind of helpful. And I was like, you know what? Let me hear them out. Let me hear some of these people out. So I started to to listen to some of those voices that I've been taught to feel bad for even considering listening to. Dinesh D'Souza was one of the first ones. I hadn't actually heard of him. I just came across him. He'd made a documentary called Hillary's America. I was like, that sounds interesting. And The Big Lie was a book that he'd written, which I read. Dave Rubin I discovered around this time as well, via a Sam Harris interview. I'd followed Sam Harris a little bit for a while. Sam Harris was on the Rubin Report, and that led me to watch a bunch of other Dave Rubin thing, which then led me to Ben Shapiro and Larry Elder and Tom Sowell. And, it was all this whole, like, I felt a little naughty for even like contemplating these things. Like, what kind of a person am I for even like thinking these thoughts and listening to these people? It really resonated with me. I'm like, hey, like, at least let's have a conversation about this. And there's some very good arguments here. And these seemed like entirely sane people that were making logical arguments. I'm all for making the argument and making the case. And if you can't argue the case, then I don't think you have a good argument, right? Like, let's be honest. Let's look at the data. And again, integrity, critical thinking is important to me. So it spoke to me in that way. It really did. And I started doing something I called Coffee with Calvin. I actually have these coasters made, Coffee with Calvin. There you go. I have a cup and other stuff, which was a daily live stream over on YouTube. I didn't do anything to promote it because I was scared of hurting my business. I have a software company. It's called Templero. I was really scared that, I might have negative consequences if people discovered this, if I was like open about my thoughts. And I started to just, blatantly ignore the thought police and just say what I thought about things. And, I don't give a crap about what the thought police thinks that I should believe or shouldn't believe. And so that was a great opportunity for me. It was like 5 days a week, 9 a.m. I would go online, and some days it would be 20 minutes. Some days it would be 2 hours, 3 hours. Sometimes it would just be me. Sometimes I would have a guest on, and I just talk through like, hey, what is the topic of the day? What's going on? What is up? What is down, people? And it was super enlightening. And it was an opportunity for me to read stuff and process my thinking in real time and enlighten myself, and an excuse to just go on and think about this. And, I process by writing and I process by talking, and it's really helpful for me to just talk out loud to figure shit out sometimes. And so two issues stood out for me in particular during this period. One was we had this government shut down the furlough situation over border wall funding. And honestly, like, the arguments on the side of Nancy and Pelosi were just idiotic, right? They were completely pretending like there's only one side to this story, right? They could choose to end the shutdowns anytime they wanted to by signing the bill, right? They could choose to, but they refused to. And so they were saying, Trump is holding everybody hostage. You're holding everybody hostage just as much as Trump is, right? No question. There's absolutely no question about that. That's like undeniable mathematical logic here. Both sides are in this conflict together. But also their arguments were just phony. It was like, oh, it'll be costly. Well, I mean, compared to what? Like, the cost here was a tiny proportion of the government budget. And there are all these other costs that you guys are proponents of. And so if this like shutdown is so bad for you, just fund that stupid border wall. If it's just about money, just go fund it and let's open the government and then we can talk about it after that, right? So clearly it wasn't just about that. So clearly they were lying about their true motives. Maybe their true motives was that they really like all these illegal immigrants because they're useful. They're useful as, low downward pressure on wages. They're useful as, for negotiation. They're useful for breaking down the state or whatever goals they have, or they think they'll become future Democrat voters or whatever it is. It's pretty clear there's something else going on here, right? I mean, to me, coming from outside, I'm like, it doesn't make any sense to have a country without a border. We've had a border, a passport-free zone in Scandinavia for a while, and now there's Schengen in the EU, which I'm deeply skeptical of. I don't think that's a great idea at all. But like, I can't just run across the border, in JFK Airport when I arrive from Denmark, and expect to be fine, right? It's not how that works. I would immediately be jailed, thrown on my ass back out, and probably be banned from ever entering the country again, right? I invested probably like $250,000 in order to acquire the visa that I have now. I'm employing, 35 people, not all of them in the US, like 25 of them in the US or something like that. In order to live here. I'm contributing. Like, why should someone just be able to run across the border and just like get to stay here when I've invested so much and am contributing so much? I don't understand the logic. It doesn't make any sense to me that you as a country would do that as a matter of policy. I can see how you want to sometimes grant asylum to people, and that's fine. You can do that. But as a matter of policy, it didn't make any sense to me. I also sat through the entire Brett Kavanaugh hearings. And again, it was just one long, endless stream of lying and deception from the Democrat side. So this stuff really opened my eyes to what is going on and to the media manipulation and to the manipulation that's happening in the Democratic Party. I don't know if it was always this way or it just started recently but once I started seeing this, it's thematic. Like even right now where they're trying to pretend like packing the court means something else than it's meant for the past 50 years. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? And to me, it's just so dishonest. And I started to really see that, right? They're redefining the meaning of words because they can't make their case with logical arguments. And I think it's just entirely unacceptable. And so the more I started researching, I read like probably 50 books and saw video after video after video and studied things and, listened to Trump rallies and Schumer and Pelosi and all this other, the real thing, not the media version of it, right? I learned how to read media articles and go for the actual facts and go to the source materials and see what they actually said. And so I saw that whole spinning in real time, and I saw that every fucking thing in Washington Post was like pure dribble, pure spin, pure propaganda. And I was like, what the hell? What's going on here? Another thing happened before this, which was, this is in August 16, I learned about the drama triangle. The drama triangle. It was actually my wife and I went to a private workshop with Katie Hendricks, and she taught about the drama triangle, which it's 3 roles: the victim and the villain and the hero. So this is 90% of politics, 98% of politics, interpersonal relationships of any sort, marriages, work relationships, international foreign relationships, lawsuits, anything, anytime there's a conflict, 98% of the time it is drama triangle. And so what it is you assume the victim position. You're saying, oh, it's your fault. It's the weather's fault. It's the countries. It's government. It's the systemic racism. It's someone else's fault that I'm unhappy that I don't have what I want, right? And then the other person becomes, if it's another person, becomes the villain, or the weather becomes the villain, or systemic racism, or whatever becomes the villain. And then the other person, if it's another person, goes like, no, I'm the victim here. You're the villain. And then you go sit there and you point fingers at each other, right? And nothing changes. It just becomes a race for the victim position. Similarly, then if someone is like, oh, I'm a victim because, I don't know, systemic racism, because, the government, the system, whatever. And then someone else swoops in and becomes the hero. It says, oh, yes, poor you. You really are a victim. Let me help you. I'll give you, I'll solve this for you. I'll give you something. And the hero feels really good for a moment because the hero feels like shit normally. But this time they get to focus in the other person, so they're not feeling their own shit. They feel like, oh, I'm such a great person. Aren't I just awesome that I'm helping this poor person? But it's very temporary relief for both parties, right? The victim gets to get reinforced that they're a victim, which is a lie, because there's always something that we can do to improve our situation. We always have agency, always, right? So the hero ends up reinforcing that position and feels good in the moment. It feels good for the victim to say, yeah, it really is not my fault and there's nothing I can do. But they stay stuck in that miserable situation, in that miserable place. And so what you need to do instead is, as the victim, step out of it and be like, no, I What is it I want, and how can I start to get there? But the pull of the victim position is so strong. And the vast majority of society lives in that victim state. And, the media and the politicians, especially the Democrat Party, I mean, this is their whole platform. And I kind of saw this in Denmark, and I hadn't really connected the dots in the US. This is the entire platform. These people are victims. These people are victims. These people are victims. These people are victims. We're the heroes. We're going to go in and help you. But you need, in order to make that happen, you actually need victims. You need to make sure that they stay fucking victims, right? Because otherwise you can have no one to help. So if that's your entire platform, you need to produce more victims or import them or just do whatever you can so you can get more victims. People that step out of victim and into creator, taking responsibility for their lives and creating happiness and love and success and abundance and all the other things, they're kind of the enemy because they're robbing you of your worth, sense of self-worth. Now you may have to actually find happiness yourself and success and well-being instead of focusing on other people's unhappiness as a way to make yourself feel better, right? And so I really started to see, this is something I learned for my personal relationships. I started to see, holy shit, this is the fucking game. This is the game in politics. And I'm like, this is so unhelpful. It's so unhelpful, right? It's really keeping people stuck. And it still is massive for me to just see how this plays out at every single level, the drama triangle. So anyway, so in terms of issues, I didn't change some areas. I didn't change much. Like welfare, I was always very skeptical of welfare, but the more I studied, the more it validated to me that welfare doesn't work. It fundamentally doesn't work. Level playing field, I've always been in favor of a level playing field. I've never understood any right-wing politicians that would side with incumbents and big corporates over competition, right? We want free market competition. Of course, I understand why, right? Because they're getting paid, lobbyism and all that stuff. So I understand it. But from a principle perspective, and I'm a very principled person, very principles, integrity, values, that's very important to me. So from that standpoint, I don't understand it. Immigration and borders is also something that it never made sense to me that you would have open borders, right? But there's some areas where I did change my mind. So gun control for one thing. I grew up in a country where we don't have any guns. Nobody has a gun. I'd never seen a gun. I'd never held a gun, right? I've never seen one up close other than, on the side as a sidearm of a cop. Actually, that's not true because I was a soldier. And as a soldier, we had, 9mm semi-automatic. I was actually a machine gun infanterist. So I'd shot one. So that wasn't true. But, handgun, I'd never held one. I'd never actually seen one up close. And now I got to spend some time with people that live out in the Midwest and have guns and shoot guns. And I got to go to shooting range and I got to go out in the desert and shoot guns. And it changed my life to really see, these are the kind of people that you want to have guns, right? They are entirely trustworthy. They are highly trained. They know exactly what they're doing. They're emotionally steady people. They're going to be the ones that save us if shit happens, right? In Switzerland, everybody there's a mandatory draft. Everybody's going to go to the army. And then when you're dismissed from the army, you get to keep your firearm at home, which means nobody's fucking ever gonna invade Switzerland, right? At least not with an infantry army, because everybody's armed. It just kind of makes sense to me that you would arm your healthy population, right? Of course, you don't want criminals to have guns, but criminals are going to be criminals. So criminals are going to figure out how to get guns, whether or not guns are legal or not. That's kind of what criminals do. They don't adhere to the law. Plus, we have all these guns out there, right? So again, like school shootings, right? Nobody wants to see school shootings, but the guns are out there. And every single case I've seen seems to be like more of a failure it's a mental health issue, right? A healthy boy doesn't go shoot up their classmates. It just doesn't, they don't do that. Girls don't shoot up their schools. So what is it about the young boys that is going wrong where we're really not helping them? That's a much bigger issue, right? Abortion, similarly, Denmark has abortion up until the 12th week. It makes sense to me. However, I was always like anti-abortion, people are crazy. Now I see the argument. I mean, this is a living human being, and it's murder to some extent. And so maybe we're like, yeah, we're okay with that up to a certain extent, but it is inherently super uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable. And so I understand the arguments against abortion. Just say no abortion, period. I totally do that, and I respect it, and I think that there's something to that. Systemic racism I was totally bought into this idea that America was systemically racist. Larry Elder and others convinced me that is not the case. But the critical piece is this: is it's not well defined. I have not been able to find a definition. I haven't been able to measure it. If we don't have a clear definition and there's no way of measuring it, it's useless as a concept other than to make people believe they're victims, right? So that we can become heroes. And I think that's the only purpose of the concept of systemic racism, is to allow certain people, you invent a new class of victims and convince them that they really are victims so that you can become the hero. I think that's the case. History of slavery. So reading Tom Sowell and White Liberals and Black Rednecks, very, very eye-opening in terms of the history of slavery, not just in the US, but across the world. Slavery has existed across any society, anywhere in the world. It still exists to this day. America didn't invent slavery. As with anything else, America systematized it and really, put it on steroids. But it was the Brits that decided to end slavery in, I believe, the 1850s, and they actually invested the British Navy in that effort to end slavery, if I recall the details correct. But essentially, Americans didn't invent slavery. It was already there. It still exists, but they ended it. And so, would it have been greater if it never happened? Absolutely. But it did, and here we are. And it was news to me that I didn't realize the true history of slavery here. And I think that's important. It's important to understand how the dots connect and what the real history is here. Another thing that happened was that I changed. And the main thing was embracing my masculinity. I was a very feminine man. Always was. I was kind of scared of my dad as a kid, and I didn't want to be like him. He seemed like tyrannical and controlling and all these things. And I was like, I don't want to be like that. So I went super duper feminine, very soft, no boundaries, very nice guy, typical nice guy. No muscle strength, drank quite a bit, married to women that were way more masculine than I was. And the longer we were married, the more masculine they got, because I was such a feminine, soft guy, right? And so what happens to a woman that when they're married to a soy boy like I was, I learned the term soy boy from Dave Rubin, and I like it. I think it's cool. And it was exactly who I was, like literally drinking soy milk. So I was, what happens to a woman when she's married to a soy boy like I was is she gets scared, right? Because she wants a man that can stand up for her and protect her and provide for her. And when the man doesn't, that's just biological. When the man turns out to be this soft wimp, pussy ass like I was, then she's like, fuck, I'm going to have to do this myself. And this is all just unconscious. It could be conscious too, but it just happens unconsciously. And so that would be the relationships I were in. And so that was around the same time that I realized, holy shit, I'm completely out of whack here, and I need to start to build up my masculine side. And that's been a journey, an intense journey. And obviously my wife then is the opposite. And so it's been that process of switching gender polarity in our relationship, which is quite an interesting feat, but we were in it together, and it's been phenomenal. And so I started to lift weights, and I started to build muscle and exercise and work out. And a critical piece was also making peace with my little inner boy. So at some point at age 6, 8 or something like that, maybe even earlier, I decided that I didn't want to be a man because I didn't want to be like my dad. Instead, I wanted to be like my mom. And that was an unconscious decision that I'd made. And so that little boy was kind of still stuck inside me at age 6. And I needed to figure out how to reconnect with him and be the father that he needed in order for him to grow up and be a fully, happy, thriving, young adult male, so that we can go out into the world together. And it's been a journey because I've been hating on him my entire life, right? I didn't want him. I didn't want to have anything to do with him. I didn't really want to be a man. And all the pressure and all the burden and all the responsibilities and everything that comes with being a man, I didn't want that, right? But it's been absolutely life-changing for me. And I see this in our society as well, right? That we don't like for boys to be boys or men to be men. We want to cut off their penises, right? We want like the toxic masculinity, like all masculinity is toxic. This whole nonsense, which is not what, it's not healthy, right? Even like the UN 2030, whatever, sustainable development goals, one of them is gender equality. It talks entirely 100% about females, about women, right? I mean, like, what the fuck? It's 50% of the population are men. Like, it's a real thing. Suicide amongst men is higher than amongst women. Men live shorter. All that stuff. Like, it's just, I'm not saying men are victims and women are terrible. I'm saying both men and women are amazing and need love and support and understanding. And we need to understand each other. We need each other, right? Literally, we cannot reproduce without each other, which is a whole other thing. What the fuck is going on with the fact that we as a species have gotten so bad at reproducing, both in terms of like not wanting to, but also in terms of not being able to and having to do IVF and stuff like that. So many things that I just opened my eyes to over that period, and it's stayed with me since. I've just stayed involved in politics, stayed super interested. I came around to becoming a Trump supporter. I think he's the only one that can right now. I mean, obviously between Biden and him, the choice is not even close for me. Right? For me, the big. The Democrat Party is just so dishonest and disingenuous, and they want to keep people as victims, and they're lying about their motivations all the time, consistently. But more than that, they have tried to imprison and impeach the president since the very beginning. Like, they've been going after him with everything they've got and lied about it repeatedly, right? Dan Bongino has been writing about this and talking about this for years. Matt Gaetz, Devin Nunes. This shit is crazy. It's crazy. And the fact that it looks like if Biden wins, they're probably going to get away with it for now. Like, even Trump is having trouble getting Durham and Barr to convict anyone of any real crimes and fast forward the shit. And so that to me is just, that right there is pretty much proof that I think Democrats and Republicans have been in cahoots with each other for years and with the media to, rob the American people blind. And we cannot let this continue. And the media is absolute garbage. It really is. The mainstream media is garbage. And it's worse than that, right? They're actively lying and covering for people that don't have our interests at heart. Happy to go through details on that, but it's so blatantly obvious once you see it. And also, Trump is the only one that's fighting against China. Not China as the people of China, because they're awesome, but the CCP, which is a terrible organization, terrible. They're holding that entire country as prisoners, as slaves, as totalitarian, horrible regime. And the fact that the NBA is doing business with them, that Hollywood is doing business with them, that Biden's son is involved with these, with the Chinese Communist Party, it's just terrible to me. And the CCP seems to have infiltrated America at every level, universities, local government, all over the place. And so that to me is the big fight, right? The big fight is against the CCP and the American deep state apparatus, which have worked against Trump from day one. And the virus, the pandemic, is completely, along those lines. I believe that it is a deliberate attempt at sabotaging Trump's reelection, unleashed by the CCP on purpose. I believe that that is what happened. I could be wrong on that, obviously. I think that one of the key things for me is to not just blindly believe anything, but always have that open mind of like, I can't know any of this stuff for sure. I can't know any of this for sure, but given the research that I've given and just my gut instinct here, this is where I'm leaning with like a 97% certainty, right? I'll never claim to be 100% certain about anything. I'll always be open to better arguments, always. But I think that the CCP unleashed this. I think it's clear, like, just the fact that they keep talking about case numbers and not deaths, right? Number of cases is irrelevant if very few people are dying from it, right? It doesn't mean shit. Yet the media and the Democrats keep touting case numbers as if they're meaningful. That alone tells you a lot about what the agenda is here. The agenda is not the American people, our well-being, the economy, which is real for people's well-being, right? It's not that at all. It is, can we harm Donald Trump's re-election chances? And how much can we do to do that, right? And yeah, so be it if the economy and everyday Americans take a dramatic hit, so be it, right? It's just, to me, is reprehensible. It's absolutely reprehensible. So counting cases is one thing, and the lockdowns, which there's no evidence that they're actually working, but they keep promoting them, right? It just, the whole thing is so dishonest, and it just makes me sad that we've all fallen for it, that we're so gullible that we go along and we shut down our lives and our businesses, and we go around scared all the time. And you see the difference between Democrat voters and Republican voters in terms of how scared they are. I think it's like almost 80% of Democrat voters are very worried, and it's like down to 20 something percent for Republican voters, right? Very, very different. Case numbers, not a relevant metric. So, yeah. And another thing, like blood antibodies testing, that seems to me to be like a huge thing. Like, we want to know how many people have actually been exposed to this thing, right? By random antibody testing, and then get a sense of what is the herd immunity level. There was one study in New York months and months ago that said 25% of people in New York had already had this thing. And then nothing. I mean, you would think that they would follow up with that every single week, and that would be a very, very important metric. Because if that number kind of, seems to indicate that, like, all right, everybody's had it anyway, so then we might as well fucking open, right? Because now everybody's who would likely get sick, they've already had it, and let's move on with our lives. Most people didn't even realize they had it, right? Yeah, the way I see it, this is about the deep state and the CCP trying to get at Trump, and Trump is the only one that's really on our side. I mean, Matt Gaetz and Devin Nunes, and there's a lot of good people that are on our side too. But in this election, and it's Trump against everybody else. And as a spiritual teacher, as a spiritual person, I have my issues with Trump, obviously. Like, for me, I'm all about doing the inner work and the outer work. And I don't see Trump really really being introspective and looking at himself. But I don't think that's his role in life. I mean, it's just not who he is, right? And I also think that he falls into the drama triangle all the time, right? He gets into playing the victim about the media and playing the victim about the Dems and all that stuff. And I don't think it's helpful. I think he could accomplish a lot more if he just quit that and he was a little more sneaky about it, a little more smart about it. But again, that's not his style, and so be it. I'll take that. It is what it is. The people that say that he's racist, he's not racist at all. If he is, he's the worst fucking racist in the world. He keeps touting black people and Hispanic people and how great they're doing. And, it's like, if you're a racist, you're so bad at it. I got an email today from I get so many emails from companies that I otherwise respect that talks about, stupid, misinformed stuff, which makes me realize how many people don't know what's really going on, right? Our president and his supporters have relentlessly attacked our free press. well, I mean, the press, he's not jailed any journalists, right? He's not gotten anyone fired, I believe. He's not actually, he attacks them for lying, about him, which I think is fair. Like they're not really treating him very fairly or honestly at all, right? And so I think it's entirely accurate to attack them, but it's like a free press is under attack. Like try being in fucking Russia or China for a change, right? And see how you think, or Iran, and see how you're Saudi Arabia, see how you like the free press there, right? We actually have a free press. I mean, and the proof is how mean and nasty they are to the president, and nothing happens to them. That's a free press. That's a free press. It's not a journalistic press. It's not a press that has integrity. It's not a press that is honest, but it's a fucking free press. What more do you want? What more do you want, honestly? Like, hello, wake up. Spreading misinformation and unfounded fears about mail-in ballots? What are you talking about? Like we've never tried this before, and there's plenty of evidence that this is, if not actually fraudulent, that it's open to fraud. There's been plenty of evidence of potential fraud during this election, and there's obvious opportunity for it. My whole thing is like, let's not argue about that. What do we want, right? Do we want an election with integrity? Is integrity in our elections very important to us? If it's very important to us, it's very important to me. I was really upset about the Diebold voting machines, and I'm like, if we're gonna have voting machines, there absolutely needs to be a paper trail where you can verify that it says what you intended it to say, and then you hand it over to someone, and then if there's any question whatsoever, we can go over each of the paper receipts and check that they say the exact same thing that the machine says, right? Very important. Also, number 2, they have to run open source software. They have to run open source software so that everybody can scrutinize the software and make sure there's no bias and make sure that there's no tampering with it. Very important. Of course, that hasn't been done. I'm very big on voter integrity. To me, it just makes sense. I forgot how we do it in Denmark. You get sent a thing in the mail, and then you have to go in person to vote. And do you have to show ID? I'm pretty sure I have to show ID. I'm not sure. I forget. It's been a while since I voted there. But just sending out ballots en masse, I mean, I don't trust the fucking USPS to send anything. Like they have proven that they can't be trusted. Why would we trust them with our elections? I just don't understand it. I think it's absolutely reasonable to ask questions. If there's a party that wants to cheat in the election, if you're someone who wants to cheat in this election, would you rather have universal mail-in ballots, or would you rather have people vote in person and present ID? Right? Which would you rather? If you're really concerned, if you really wanted to cheat, which do you think would make it easier for you to cheat? Universal mail-in ballot, of course. Of course, it's so much easier to cheat, right? So you have to not think very clearly in order to say that. You're like, people are just gossiping assigned opinions, right? And then they say, have even gone so far as to question whether they will accept the results of the upcoming election. I mean, yeah, if there's fraud, are they going to accept? I mean, what did Al Gore do in 2000, right? Did he accept the results? What did Hillary Clinton do and the entire Democrat Party in 2016? Did they accept the results of the election? Fuck no, they didn't, right? So is Trump going to leave office if Biden clearly wins? Of course he is. He doesn't have a fucking choice. The Secret Service is going to escort him out. Dude, what do you think? He's going to start some karate, kung fu crap, fighting the Secret Service guys? Of course not. He's going to be nicely escorted out into Marine One and return to civil life. That's how it's going to happen. Of course. You just have to be an idiot to think that anything else would happen, right? You have to be really brainwashed into the media which wants you to not think for yourself. And that's the big point here is the media is brainwashing you. You have to stop trusting the media. You have to start seeking out sources for yourself. Don't use the Facebook news feed algorithm shit that it feeds to you, right? Don't use the Twitter algorithm feed, right? Choose the people that you want to follow, that you want to listen to, and choose people on either side. Read books, watch interviews on Dave Rubin, listen to Rush Limbaugh, to Ben Shapiro, listen to whoever is on the left that if you need more, I mean, CNN and MSNBC should be plenty for you. And inform yourself and just think things through. Does this make sense? Does this even make sense? This is logically consistent, right? That is what I've learned that you have to do. And this is why I am no longer in camp Democrat. I wouldn't consider myself in camp Republican, because I still think that most politicians are corrupt in the sense that they're bought and paid for by special interests. They're not on our side. So my whole mission is we need to talk to each other. We need to find out for ourselves what we want to do with this country. And it starts with, what is the outcome, right? What is the goal that we want? And I think we all want for people to be happy and healthy and prosperous and safe. I think we all want the economy to be thriving, and we all want the planet to be sustainable. And so if that's what we want, then we need to get busy figuring out how to get there. And these are not complicated problems. These are actually all solved problems, but we can only solve them when we're honest with each other and we're honest about the solutions and how to get there. As long as we're lying about, what we want and deceiving each other, then we're never going to get anywhere. You and I as people, we need to take the power back. We need to take responsibility for this, and we need to create the country that we want to live in, which happens to be my book coming out. We can do this, overcoming the political divide and creating the world that we want to live in. So thank you for watching. I appreciate it. And again, this is why I walked away from the Democratic Party. I hope you'll join me. Freedom is so much better. It feels so much better than being part of that camp. So hope you'll join me. See you. Thank you. Bye. Go to notablenation.com. Do it now.